In this video, we're going to show you how to install struts on your INFINITI G37 X, located on the front side of your vehicle. Using a 21mm socket, loosen and remove your lug nuts. Now on our particular vehicle, we have a locking lug nut. We have the key to remove it. If you just have a standard lug nut, go ahead and take it off. Once you have those removed, remove the wheel and set it aside. Now with the wheel off, we're going to go ahead and access our flex hose right here, and this is bolted to our strut assembly. Using a 12mm socket, loosen and remove the nut anchoring the flex hose. Set that aside. We'll be reusing that after, and slide this off. On the front portion of our strut assembly, we have our ABS wire right here. I want to go ahead and pull the wire out of these retainers just to get this out of the way, and just tuck that off to the side. Now we have our strut right here, and it comes down into our clevis fork. Now there's a 14mm bolt right here. We want to loosen and remove that. Now if you have air tools, you'll probably zip that out nice and quick. We want to be careful not to break this bolt, so that's why we're doing this by hand. We want to get the feel for it. And then periodically, go ahead and use some rust penetrant on there to go ahead and soak that bolt down. We already went ahead and did that. The purpose of this clevis fork bolt here is to clamp the strut into it. So I'm going to make sure we can get this out. And once we do, we'll just set that bolt aside. There it is. Now our clevis fork comes down, and there is a bolt that comes through securing this to the lower control arm. It's a 17mm nut with a 17mm bolt head on the other side. I'm going to use a box end 17mm on the bolt head and a 17mm socket on the nut. I'm going to loosen and remove this. Now this job can be done with hand tools. You don't need power tools to do this. Spin that out. You want to try and get this bolt out as well. It's okay if you go ahead and grab that knuckle assembly. You might be able to wiggle this around and get this bolt out a little bit easier. There it is. Using an 18mm socket, go ahead and loosen and remove the sway bar end link nut. Okay, work that out. We now want to come up here to our upper control arm, and we want to remove the bolt here securing the knuckle to the upper control arm. We're going to use a 14mm socket on the nut side and a 14mm on the bolt. Got to remove that. Before we pull this out, we want to make sure that we have some sort of securing strap, because when this comes out, we don't want it to just flap out. We are going to want to anchor this either using holes in the chassis or something like that to keep this from falling out too far. You can see that control arm start to release there. Now at this point here, now that we have the upper control arm separated, this is where I'm going to use my securing strap. And I want to prevent this knuckle from swinging out too far, pulling on our CV axle. Okay, now we have our clevis fork here. I'm going to pull down on this control arm and knuckle and work this clevis fork down and off of our strut. We can see here, pull that off. Let's go ahead and remove that completely from the vehicle. Make sure there's nothing pulling on these lines, anything on this knuckle. All right. At this point here, we're completely separated on the bottom. Our strut is free. Let's move up top and remove the 3 nuts up on the top. On the top side here, we have our strut tower and the body itself. Now there are 3 12mm nuts. I want to go ahead, loosen and remove those. Now when you remove the last one, that shock or strut unit is going to drop out. So what I recommend doing, reach around the edge of the fender, grab that strut assembly, loosen and remove that, and then go into the fender area. Go ahead and lower this down and out and remove it from the vehicle. On the top of our strut here, this here is just a warning tag. This here tells you not to loosen this center nut. What we do want to loosen are the 3 securing nuts that are supplied with a strut assembly. Remove these and set them aside. Once you have these off, let's go ahead and feed this up into the body. Now when installing our strut assembly, there is a tab that is going to be facing out towards you, and then this stud here is going to be facing towards the back of the vehicle. So go ahead and feed this down and in. Then we can feed the studs up into the body. Hold that in there with one hand, or you can have assistance while doing it. And go ahead and get some of these nuts started to hold it up in place. I'm going to thread those down. Now I'm not going to tighten these yet, I'm just going to get them hand snug. Let's go ahead and transition to the wheel well area and get everything installed down there. Now we're going to go ahead and bring our knuckle over, and we need to install our clevis fork. So we're simply going to slide this down and around. Work this down around the control arm. Now it's safe to go ahead and remove our securing strap. Set that aside. Now this is where we can push down on the lower control arm, and we're going to work that strut into the clevis fork. There it is. Now the split on the front of the clevis fork will allow this tab on our strut to fit right inside of it. There we go, and sliding it up into place. We can now take our bolt. I'm going to feed this in, and we have to lift up on the control arm. And we're going to push the clevis fork right up against the tab on the strut assembly itself, bottoming that out. Go ahead and thread that bolt in the clevis fork on the top. Now we're not going to tighten this one down yet. We still want to have some mobility. thread that in as far as you can by hand. Now that we have our bolt in our clevis fork, we can now go ahead and install the lower bolt and the clevis fork through the control arm. So now we're just we can grab that knuckle and assembly and maneuver this around. Get that bolt in. And we'll get that nut started on the other side. Just thread that on as far as you can by hand. And that's installed there. Let's install our upper control arm to the knuckle. I'm going to go ahead and grab that control arm. Push that down and in. And put our bolt through. Now, if you can't get the bolt through, that means that the notch on the ball joint isn't lined up. Ours popped right in. Go ahead and install that nut. Go ahead and take your sway bar end link here and insert it into the sway bar itself. Now, for any reason, if your sway bar end link is not going in nice and smooth, go ahead and simply put your jack underneath the knuckle here. We're going to go ahead and raise this up gently. Slide that on in. Go ahead and get that nut on there. Go ahead and zip it on down. Once you have your nut on there, go ahead and tighten that down. Now let's go ahead and torque that down to 46 foot-pounds. Before we tighten down our bolt through the clevis fork into the lower control arm, what we want to do now is go ahead and jack up our suspension. We're going to go ahead and get this into what we call the neutral ride height. What that means is if we had the tires on the vehicle and it was on the ground and the body weight had compressed the suspension, that is a neutral ride height. So what we're going to do is use our pole jack to represent having the tire on the ground. And we're going to jack this up just to the point where our vehicle starts to come off of our lift. That is going to compress our suspension and get us into our neutral ride height. All right. Now, the main reason why we do this here is if we tighten this in its fully drooped ride position and then we torque it and then we compress it, it can actually twist the bushings and everything on the inside of the control arm. It's going to cause it to bind up and not give you the appropriate ride that the shock is intended to do. Let's go ahead and tighten down our hardware here. With that tight, let's go ahead and follow up with a torquing of 120 foot-pounds. Once that's torqued, go ahead and lower the jack and let that suspension back down. On the front side here, let's install our ABS wire. On the back side of the strut, go ahead and install your flex hose. Now when this lines up, there's a little tab on the bottom right here that actually gets it to line right up and locks it into place. Install that nut. Let's go ahead and snug that down. Now once it bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. Make sure that's good and tight. We want to go ahead and torque down our clevis fork bolt to shock to 33 foot-pounds. Before you torque it, you do want to make sure that the shock itself is fully seated into the clevis, and ours is. There's no gap between the shock spacer here and the clevis fork, so we know we're bottomed out. There we go. Let's tighten down our upper ball joint to control arm here. And let's torque this to 41 foot-pounds. Underneath the hood here, we're going to go ahead and torque down our 3 strut nuts here to 28 foot-pounds. Now that we have our shock installed here, you want to repeat for the passenger side. At that point there, install your wheels, and don't forget, get an alignment performed after you've completed this job. Go ahead and install your wheel. I'm going to go ahead and get all of our lug nuts started by hand. Once we get all of these started, we're going to go ahead and snug them down. We have our locking key. Go ahead and torque down your lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. We're going to use our locking key first. Then we'll continue with the rest in a crisscross pattern. And you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.